term new member states we generally use for those countries that have joined the European Union in 2004, 2007, and I'm still going to say also Croatia in 2013. But so we basically look at a group of 13 countries, with all of them except for Malta and Cyprus being post-communist countries or post-socialist countries, having only recently came out of transformation, political and economic. And their status right now is that they are considered to be equal member states of the European Union, one of 28 still. And so therefore they're also fully able to participate in all the decision-making processes in all the policy areas that the European Union spans. Well, every single member state has its own agenda. Every single member state wants to leave a mark on the EU's policy portfolio, policy making, not only foreign policy, but any policy. Every country has its own national interests that it would like to see translated into an EU-wide policy approach. And in that sense, the new member states are not different from all the other member states that have formed part of the European Union in the past. It's also very difficult to speak of the new member states as in terms of one homogeneous group, because they also all have their own separate interests, of course. Nevertheless, very often these interests converge, and therefore those countries are able to pursue those interests jointly. They do, of course, also have their own interests, and they're trying to find their own policy niche, and they're trying to find ways and mechanisms of how they can have their own interests translated in Brussels-made policy. And they succeed or they don't succeed, just like any other member state. We have to distinguish between the different elements of the EU's external relations, because of course part of external policy is also trade policy, common commercial policy, and that has been in existence since the very beginning of the European Union. The European Union is also a very important humanitarian and a very important development actor, and also those elements have been in existence for a very long time. But due to the context of the Cold War, the European Union never really ventured into foreign and security policy. There were certain attempts in the 70s and in the 80s, but they were not really institutionalized. But as a response to the many external developments that have shaken the international arena in the late 80s and in the early 1990s, the European Union was sort of pushed into also developing more of a foreign policy agenda. Also in terms of security, but that was rather slow, and we only see now very slow progress in that area. So that is why foreign policy took so long to develop, and that is also why foreign policy stands out. It is the one policy area that is entirely intergovernmental, except for a couple of exceptions, which means that all member states have to agree on a certain policy before a decision is being taken. And that has, of course, something to do with the fact that foreign policy is so strategic to every single country's sovereignty, and it is regarded as a prerogative of every single member state, and that is why they are reluctant to share sovereignty with a higher institution, with a supranational institution. As said, just like any other member state, you're trying to leave your mark. And in terms of foreign policy making, it was expected, and it turned out to be true, that of course many of the new member states, especially those of Central and Eastern Europe, would try to put more emphasis on the EU developing closer relations with the countries of Eastern Europe, whether we talk of Belarus, whether we talk about Ukraine, that they would try to leave a mark also on the EU's relations with Russia. That they would probably try to emphasize human rights and democracy promotion to a greater extent in the EU's portfolio, which is a clear result of themselves having been through transformation only very recently. They have energy policy interests that differ from those energy policy interests of the older member states, because they're less interconnected to the west of Europe or to North Africa, but most of their energy comes from Russia. or the post-Soviet space, or through countries that formed the Soviet Union in the past. So they're much more reliant on energy deliveries from there. So it's a whole span of issues that was expected to be uploaded onto the EU's agenda, and that also really was uploaded in the aftermath of the enlargement. When we talk about how these countries have influenced the EU's foreign policy towards the East, first and foremost, of course, that is the launch of the Eastern Partnership in 2009, where those countries have been instrumental in launching it. However, knowing how to play by the rules, they also relied on coalition partners from among the older member states. The emphasis that most of the new member states are taking is for the EU to support to a greater extent civil society in those countries. So what we can see is that there are instruments, financial instruments, that are being used to finance civil society in what we consider to be the shared neighborhood between the European Union and Russia, where emphasis is on promoting democratic principles, on promoting democratic governance, promoting the understanding of human rights or the importance of observing human rights. Emphasis is on institution building, on capacity building. So we've seen those member states to be rather active in that area.